Greetings, ladies and gentlemen from London-based Chatham House. My name is Orisa Lutsevich, and I am the head of Ukraine Forum here. I'm really glad that we are convening this important discussion at the crucial time for Ukraine and for Europe on the 1,000 days of Russian unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. We will be looking at the implications of the recent US elections, but also at what is at stake for Ukraine and for Europe, and what kind of war outcomes we collectively are trying to achieve in order to make sure this war never repeats again. This is, of course, a time when many governments are adjusting their strategy to what is going on. And this war has been going in a vicious way for 1,000 days. It's a total war that Russia wages, not just along the front line in the east, but it is targeting all of Ukraine, its critical infrastructure, its energy system, its enterprises, its libraries, and is really trying to eradicate Ukrainian national identity from the political map of Europe. Today, it occupies roughly 20% of Ukrainian territory. This war has been recognized on the 2nd of March, just to remind all of us, of 2023, as an unprovoked act of aggression by 141 members of the UN General Assembly. And this very declaration called for Russia to immediately withdraw its forces. But this is not where we are today, unfortunately. And I have a great panel with me to discuss exactly this, where we are today and where we want to be tomorrow. I will introduce the speakers in the panel. They will, in the order they will appear. And I would like to remind all of us that this event is on the record. It will be widely shared, both with the full video recording on our website, but also on our social media and various channels. And I'm pleased to tell that a lot of journalists are also tuning in. I am joined from Kyiv by Mikhailo Samus, who is a military and security expert with over 12 years in Ukrainian armed forces and currently running a new geopolitics research networks that brings various experts to provide the analysis and insights on geopolitics. Welcome, Mikhailo. Next to Mikhailo is Arseniy Yatsenyuk, a Ukrainian politician, economist, and Arseniy is the chairman of the Kyiv Security Forum and the founder of the Open Ukraine Foundation that I had a pleasure and one of my most interesting career adventure to actually help Arseniy launch when he was the foreign minister. But since then, he, of course, served as Ukrainian prime minister at the times of when really the war started against Ukraine, when Crimea was occupied right after the Euromaidan revolution. And he is joining us actually from Berlin, where he is for a series of high-level meetings and interviews. Next to Arseniy is Kajsa Ollengren, who is currently in Amsterdam, but not a stranger to many of us, and especially for Ukrainians at the beginning of this difficult 2024, when the American assistance was blocked in the United States. Kajsa was at the forefront at that time, defense minister of the Netherlands, to advocate for action for investments in defense and security of Europeans' own production to support Ukraine. I'm really pleased she could take time to be with us. And last but not least, from Berlin is Benjamin Tallis, who is the director of Democratic Strategy Initiative, the German in disguise, a Brit, but very much immersed into a German politics, working on research and public advocacy for what is at stake with this invasion and why we should strengthen democracy. Previously, he worked at our sister think tank, German Institute of International Affairs, DGAP. So you see, we have a wealth of expertise. While we are discussing amongst ourselves, please put in your questions in the Q&A part, and we'll be putting them to the panel. But before we start with the kind of big questions. I want each of you to say literally 30 seconds. What was the first thought you had in your mind when the first missiles hit Kyiv? I remember this moment, and as I say it, I have goosebumps because I remember I had a thought, this is not the end of Ukraine, this is the end of Putin. And this actually was my thought at that moment with this overreach of this invasion. So maybe if I can bring in Kaisa and then Arseny and the rest of the panel just to share a moment of that thought when you take yourself back 1,000 days. Kaisa.
Well, at the time, I was the Minister of Defense, quite newly appointed, 1 month. I got the call in the middle of the night, one of the generals who said it has started. And all at once, I was very practical. I only thought about what can we do, what must we do, how can we help? That was really my thought. It has started and we must act.
Thank you, Kaisa. Arseny, what was on your mind?
Well, it wasn't unexpected for me. It was crystal clear for me that Putin is to wage an invasion against Ukraine. So the only question I had in my mind is how to save Ukraine, period.
Thanks. Mikhailo.
For me, it was, of course, not a surprise, and I started to act when the cyber attacks before the missiles started. It was a huge cyber attacks, and I understood that this is the beginning of the existential war, both for Ukraine and Russia, and it won't be easy, but of course we'll win. So it was a very, very practical mode, actually.
Thank you. And Benjamin, where were you? What were your thoughts?
I was in Berlin and I was walking down the banks of the Spree with my baby daughter at the time in her stroller. And the immediate thought was, how do we make sure that she has a Europe to grow up in? How do we actually make sure that this can be a Europe of peace, freedom, and security? But it was the next day when I was listening to the BBC on the same walk, I was listening to Nick Robinson reporting from Kyiv saying, as I look around this vibrant, dynamic European city in Kyiv, I thought, oh, there is a difference there between how he's described that now and how the BBC has been describing Kyiv for 20 years that I've been following it. And I thought this time we might actually stand up and do something different. Now, we haven't done enough, but I thought there was hope then, and that's what we have to seize upon and carry through.
Thank you. So, yeah, it's interesting to reflect on this moment because obviously some of our worst fears have not come true, thanks God, but also some of our worst hopes were also a bit shattered, and we're in this moment. So I would like to bring in Mikhailo, who has a lot of defense and security experience, and he's daily appearing on Ukrainian television and YouTube channels, commenting, trying to explain to Ukrainians what is going on the battlefield. So how critical actually is the situation right now in Ukraine? And does it look, because we hear a lot in the West, that some kind of de-escalation is possible? And if you look at that eventuality or possibility, maybe not a probability, then does Ukraine have capabilities to defend the current front line? Mikhailo, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me and having me on the this great event. It's honor for me and a pleasure, especially on the 1,000 days of this awful war which Putin and Russia started against us. Actually, what I like to say, I think that Putin doesn't celebrate now 1,000 days of so-called SVO. He doesn't celebrate, and this is the main conclusion for 1,000 days, because he expected very fast, flashy operations, more special than military, to actually occupy the Ukrainian capital, and after this occupy militarily the Ukrainian territory, to put the pro-Russian government and actually destroy Ukrainian nation and destroy Ukrainian state or build something else. So what we have now on the battlefield, actually, I think that you are pretty familiar with the situation that Russians, since the autumn last year, conducting the offensive operations. But I'm sure that the results, that is not really expected to have now for 1,000 days of the start of the full-scale aggression. They didn't occupy Donbass. It's obviously that they since catastrophic situation in Kyiv Oblast, Chernihiv, Sumy, and then the withdrawing forces, after this first stage of the war, they decided to occupy Donbass and as much as possible Ukrainian territories, and after this trying to finalize it. Because I would say that from military point of view, Russia cannot win Ukraine. Russia cannot win Ukraine by military forces, and they trying to act now as fast as possible, preparing for some hypothetical negotiations with Trump or even with President Zelensky, but trying to create a better conditions on the battlefield. They trying to act very brutal and by a terroristic style, using the massive missile attacks. After the 3 months of pause, they obviously concentrate some missiles, and I told you that they can produce about 120 missiles per month. So they didn't use missiles for 3 months already, and a couple days ago they launch one of the most massive attack against Ukraine, including Kyiv and even Transcarpathia region, which is a very rare situation. They used 120 missiles in one strike and approximately 80 Shahed drones. So Shahed drones, they using 80, 90 Shahed drones nightly. So Ukrainians cannot sleep because they always on the alerts and are always on the air raids. So, but missiles, they used only a couple days ago, trying to destroy Ukrainian energy infrastructure, and they had some success. In Kyiv, for example, we have a gaps in electricity now. So I have no electricity now in my office, but I have it on my home. So I'm streaming now from my apartment, not from the office. This is the situation. And of course, Putin will try to use military force on Donbass, trying to advance in step by step, and of course, massive attacks on Ukrainian cities. They, for example, for a couple days, they killed civilians in Sumy, in Sumy region, several cities, in Kharkiv, of course, in Kyiv, in Odessa, the brutal attacks on Odessa for last weeks. So they trying to show to, of course, globally, but first of all to Mr. Trump, the elected president, that they are winning. The Ukraine have no chance to be strong on the military positions on the battlefield. So please don't ask me about freezing or stopping this conflict. Go to Kyiv and ask them to capitulate, to stop this war by Ukrainian interest. So this is an absolutely clear strategy for Putin now. And for Ukraine, of course, the Zelensky victory plan was presented several weeks ago, and it was exactly about conditions which Ukraine could use do not allow Putin to use this strategy effectively. I mean that invitation to NATO, the long and deep strikes, the deterrence instruments, including long-range missiles, but longer than ATACMS, for example, and different support to Ukraine in sphere on not only military, but another one more moment. It's an internal plan for victory, because it was a plan for victory, kind of with a request to our friends and allies. But of course, we need to have internally to be stronger, to have to be ready for any scenario, including when Mr. Trump will say to Ukraine that, okay, guys, you should freeze the conflict, you should stop the fight, because otherwise I won't support you. I will stop the financial military support if you don't stop the fighting. And final word about the de-escalation. In Ukraine, we perceiving term as de-escalation like a negative connotation, because de-escalation means that Ukrainians stop defending their own country. And so we need escalation. Please give us to make escalation to defend our country. not the escalation, because the escalation means we stop and Russians they occupy territories and freezing the conflict, even ceasefire, which is pretty actually pretty obviously will be proposed to Ukraine to ceasefire and try to negotiate some conditions. It's pretty probable in couple months. So actually now we finally have a decision and permission to have a deep strikes, and we're happy that this night it was the first time then the Ukraine used ATACMS in Bryansk Oblast for ammunition and artillery and missile depot. I think it's pretty successful. I hope that we have time. 2 months it's enough if we have a proper instruments to be stronger, to go to the peace with through the force, not for escalation or de-escalation, which is pretty negative for Ukrainians. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer the questions.
Thank you, Mikhailo. And I think given what we have heard from Russian leadership, it still remains to be the case that, you know, if Russia stopped fighting, there is no war. But if Ukraine stopped fighting, there is no Ukraine. And this have been the sentiment inside Ukraine. Like you also said, it's an existential war. So now when we increasingly hear these propositions that there could be some interim or partial solution, that Ukraine cannot defeat Russian contingent on its sovereign territory. This, of course, raises a lot of questions and I'm sure anxiety about the future, not only of Ukraine, but also of Europe. But first, I want to bring in Arseny on Ukraine, because you've been through, as I said, this Russian invasion from the beginning, in charge of Ukrainian government. You've seen this unfolding and you see now the moment we are at. What are the implications really for Ukraine if this war is finished on Putin's terms, some kind of, you know, unstable ceasefire line? Can Ukraine has a future, and what it can lead to, so that people really understand the consequences? Arseny, over to you.
Larissa, thanks for having me and thanks for hosting this event. And thanks for mentioning that this war had been waged by Russia not 1,000 days ago. War criminal Putin waged this war in 2014. He declared this war in 2007 during the Munich Security Conference. And in 2014, he illegally annexed Crimea and sent his military to the east of part of Ukraine. The question you've asked is a dramatic one, but it has a very clear-cut answer. There is no option for Ukraine except to fight and to prevail in this war. As for war criminal Putin, this war is it's a kind of his historic mission that he himself crafted for his tenure. So he believes that he is able to restore the Soviet Union. He believes that he is able to undermine the global order. He believes that he is able to annihilate Ukraine. And I want to be very clear, delivering this message to everyone who is listening to us. His ultimate goal is to annihilate Ukraine, to exterminate Ukraine as a country and Ukrainians as a nation. What's going to happen to Ukrainian nation? We will be just exterminated. So that's not an option for us. But let me elaborate on the implications for the entire free world. For the Germany, which I am right now in, I just addressed the Berlin Security Conference. For the United States, for the entire free world, for those who still believe in the values of the free world, this would be a disaster. Because Putin waged the war not just against Ukraine. His ultimate goal is to take over Ukraine and, together with Chinese, with North Korea, with Iran, with another terrorist states and terrorist organizations, to take over the entire world. And look, I want to be very clear, I am not exaggerating. Look what's happening everywhere in the world. The thing is that we have to win this war to save Ukraine and to save the democracy, the sovereignty, and liberties and freedom in the entire world. So whether we can do it, Russia, yes, we can. You remember President Obama? He said, yes, we can. Now, he said, and we have to deliver this. Because, look, Now, Mikhailo, he just offered his take on what's up on the ground. You don't need me to know what's on the ground. You can read everything in the media. Situation, the military, the military situation is extremely complex and challenging and complicated and dramatic. You're well aware. So let me focus here not on the downsides, but on the upsides. Ukraine managed to survive. Putin strongly believed that with his blitzkrieg, he can take over Ukraine in 3 days. In the end, we are fighting for practically 3 years, but in general, 10 years. His army is 10 times bigger than Ukrainian one. Look at the numbers, starting with the population and ending with raw material, military industrial complex, and the rest of the stuff. So compared to Russia, we are outmanned and outgunned. But in the end, Putin, war criminal Putin, already lost around 700 soldiers. So his casualties, his losses are just immense. 700,000 people have been either killed or wounded. So Ukrainian military managed to demolish half of the Russian land forces. Could you just imagine this? Half of the Russian land forces. Look at the Ukrainian at the Russian economy. Well, they still managed to overcome the sanctions that have been imposed. But on the other hand, Russian economy already got the fever. So what's Putin's plan? He wants to outwit us. And the biggest threat I see is that this kind of empty talks over the fatigue and empty talks over some kind of weird negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. It sounds ridiculous for me. It sounds stupid for me. Have you ever heard that Putin wants to have really to negotiate with Ukraine? What I've heard from Putin, that he wants Ukraine to capitulate. So we need to stop this empty talk. It's this hot air and lip service. We need to focus on a very clear-cut action plan, how to strengthen Ukrainian position. And there is only one way how to get to the diplomatic solution, to strengthen Ukrainian military and to strengthen the Ukrainian posture on the battlefield. This is the solution.
Thank you, Arseny. And if I may take one question to you straight away before coming to Kaisa, because there's a proposition. The question is related to whether Ukraine may be taking the neutrality status once held by states like Sweden. What is your answer to that proposition?
Well, let me skip diplomatic answer. It's a crap, okay? Period. And the reason is very simple. I want to remind everyone who is listening to us that in 2014, when war criminal Putin waged the war against Ukraine and illegally annexed Crimea, Ukraine was a neutral state under the Ukrainian legislation. So there is only one solution how to provide an ironclad guarantees, security guarantees for Ukraine, to make Ukraine a NATO member. There is no other option. And the quicker we make this, our allies, the quicker we can stop this war. And we wasted a lot of time. And we are dragging, I mean, our Western partners, we are dragging our feet. So we missed a chance in DC, in Washington this year. We missed a chance last year in Vilnius summit. And we are still considering a number of options. I witnessed, not just a witness, I co-sponsored a letter in 2008 as a Speaker of the House asking NATO member states to provide map for Ukraine. Due to Germans and French opposition, Ukraine failed to get map. Ukraine failed to become the full-fledged member. In the end, what Putin did, he invaded Georgia and he invaded Ukraine.
Yeah, thank you. We also looked at, I want to remind our listeners and Melania, my colleague, will also add in the chat the reports we did in 2023, How to End Russia's War, which also looks at how not to end Russia's war and exactly debunk some of these ideas, from the likelihood of a negotiated way of ending the war to Ukraine neutrality as the way to appease Putin. So that is all available online. But now let me bring in Kaisa, who comes from the NATO member state, but also she has been a really vocal proponent of arming Ukraine and creating that posture on the battlefield that both Mikhailo and Arseny were talking about. Now, given, you know, risks of kind of isolationist America, or America pushing it on Europe, just on Europe, how, Kaisa, do you think Europe can manage this? Do we still have time to do more in order to end this in the best possible way for all of us, for Ukraine and for Europe? Kaisa, please.
Thank you very much, Alicia, and thank you also for organizing this this event on this special day, a day that we cannot celebrate much, but it is important to mark the 1,000 days. It is important to say that the war has been going on for more than 10 years, and it is important to realize that things are changing, and we have to take into account what the development in the United States could mean. And what Europe can do, because Europe has agency, and we know that we have to act. We only have to agree on how to do that. And I think that is where we are now. And I think I also want to congratulate you on bringing in two very strong Ukrainian voices first to start with, because every time we talk about Ukraine, it has to be with Ukraine. And I couldn't agree more with what has just been said by both Mikhailo and Arseny. So thank you for that. And then going back to what can and must we do, because this existential threat to Ukraine is an existential threat to Europe. And unfortunately, we live in a very dangerous times when the world is really shifting to this more multipolar world. And we must be aware of the fact that Russia is connected to other autocrats. Let's face it, they are connected, they are helping each other. Russia could not do this on its own, but it relies on countries like North Korea, but also, of course, Iran. And these are countries that are a threat in themselves in the regions where they are active. They're helping each other. That means also that Russia is not getting what it's getting, the ammunition and the drones, for nothing. It is giving something in return. So I think we have to always have that broad picture, not only in Europe, but also in the United States, because I think that what we can and must do in Europe to support Ukraine is also the way to keep, in the end, the United States connected. Of course, I cannot know what Donald Trump is going to do. We don't know. We don't know if the people that he has put forward that have said various things, some that can be seen as a ray of hope for Ukraine, but also others that sound more like the echo of the Kremlin. So that's very, very uncertain. But there are stakes also for the United States. And I think it's up to us, the European countries now, to take a step forward. And in the end, if we succeed to do that, that will probably, if it is successful or not, but it is the only way to keep the United States engaged. So I think very simply what we must do, we must remember that while we see this large-scale war in Ukraine, we ourselves are also attacked, not by missiles as yet, but there is a hybrid warfare going on. There is sabotage. We are now looking at the cables again between Finland and Germany. We've seen the packages that were maybe meant to explode on airplanes. We don't know. There are acts of violence. There's violation of the airspace. So there's constant propaganda and disinformation. So we are directly targeted by Russia, the country that has invaded Ukraine. So if Ukraine itself is not reason enough for Europeans to act, then the fact that we are already under attack should be a reason to act. And then I think, so I said Europe has agency, and that means that we must do more and more of the things that we're already doing, which is supporting Ukraine, increasing our support to Ukraine, to strengthen Ukraine's position on the battlefield. I think any road to peace goes through strength. The stronger Ukraine is, the better the outcome eventually at some point will be. And I think Putin, as far as we all can guess, seems to understand only this. Only when he sees that he cannot win, he will contemplate some way out of this war. So that's why it's so vital that we continue our support. I think it's very encouraging that Ukraine has built a strong defense industry of its own. It's really impressive. I've seen it with my own eyes. We've heard President Zelensky today name numbers that are impressive. Number of long-range drones that they're going to build, numbers of long-range missiles that Ukraine can build itself. So as far as we have not yet increased our own outcome of the defense industries enough, or output of the defense industries, we should invest directly in the Ukrainian defense industry. There is still a lot of capacity. It's the financial side that's the problem, not the building of the actual ammunition and weapons in Ukraine. So support Ukraine, support Ukraine's defense industry, and that will pay off. It will pay off for Ukraine, but it also will pay off for our own security in the future. Of course, as far as I'm concerned, becoming member of the European Union and of NATO, we all know it's in the peace. It's in the victory plan. Issuing the invitation to NATO, it seems like a small step because we've already promised Ukraine that it will become a member of NATO. But issuing the actual membership, of course, is a very, very strong signal to the Kremlin that no matter what you do, no matter how long this war drags on, Ukraine is going into NATO. And I know that there are countries, Germany, United States, who are not there yet. And maybe we will never get there, but I will continue to promote it because I think it is vital. Without security guarantees, Ukraine will never be secure. And the only really good security guarantee there is NATO and Article 5. So issuing that invitation is an irreversible step towards a secure future for Ukraine. I think also what Europe must do is realizing that in the current situation, in the current world, where the United States has many interests, also in other places than Europe, we have to do more. So we have to strengthen ourselves, and we could best do that by strengthening the European pillar in NATO. It is also the best way to keep the United States engaged by showing that we have increased spending, that we are also better in cooperating amongst ourselves, and we are able to take over some of these responsibilities that we always relied on the United States for, like the really expensive capabilities like heavy lifting, but also space, for instance, where we're completely dependent on the Americans. If we step up our game on the European side as part of NATO, it will show the United States that we do take our responsibility, and it will also strengthen us against Russia. And I think there the European Union can also play its role, and should, with the new European Commission. There are funds that are already available, like structural funds, and we could also look into the Euro bonds that could be used directly to strengthen, for instance, infrastructure that is needed for military mobility and other really expensive investments that have to be made if we want to secure Europe. And from that, of course, it's a small step to the European defense industry itself that should partner up with Ukraine, of course, but where we have to create a European market for the defense industry. It is still fragmented. It's still organized along national lines. We depend upon the cooperation that industries themselves start with industries in other countries. And I think we have to realize if we want to grow up geopolitically, we have to have a very strong defense industry. Then only then Europe will be a global player. Europe will have a geopolitical sense of its own. And there also, I think the European Union should be in the lead, taking the NATO standards, translating them to what has to be done on the European market and in the European industry. But most of all, and coming back to Ukraine, I think we are at a moment where we have to realize that we're really at crossroads. And for me, it would be unacceptable to risk that Ukraine would lose this war. And that means we have to keep our heads cool, but we also have to prioritize and to act. And we have to prioritize Ukraine in every possible way. Also, if the United States, after the start of the Trump administration, would really turn its back. And we resent thinking about this possibility, but we must. I think the European Union is probably better prepared for a trade war than for an actual war without the United States. And that is worrisome. We don't have much time, so we have to act, and we have to act now.
Thank you, Kaisa. And I wanted to ask you before, I want to go to Arseny to reflect, because on that appeal for prioritizing Ukraine, would you agree that part of the problem of where we are right now is actually lack of strategy that will underpin resources for Ukraine's victory? Because we have seen, denying Putin's objectives strategy, and I'm sure Mikhailo would agree with that. But would you say, you've been to many meetings, right? I'm sure as the Minister of Defense, what stands on the way of this strategy that would equip and fund Ukraine to win?
Well, I think also there, if you look at these 3 years, so in the very beginning, when we started also the Ramstein group, led by the United States, but with many countries, I think we were quite successful in a very short period of time to coordinate amongst ourselves and to get to Ukraine what they needed. After that, we still, all countries involved were willing to do this, but then it started to hurt. It started to hurt our own armed forces. It started to hurt industry, and it started to hurt budgets. It became more difficult. But that is now, I think we cannot accept that anymore. And that is, I'm sure Benjamin will go into a letter that was published today with a suggestion of how to go forward. But I think that is also what we have to do. We have to gather those countries who really see this as an existential challenge for all of us, for Ukraine, but also for us. And to gather those countries and to take that step forward, which is making sure that we have the budget, making sure that we invest it as soon as possible, really at the speed of essence, in Ukraine. And at the same time, think more out of the box than we're doing now about what we can do ourselves. Because I was really struck by when this, let's say, it was only the press, of course, that Biden had agreed on lifting the restrictions for the attackers. Immediately there was this response from Moscow. There was even a sort of interview with Putin on the street. I've never seen something like it before. And the only objective of that is to scare us. And we should not be scared. Every escalation in this war has always been done by Russia, has always been done by Putin, never by Ukraine and never by Ukraine's allies. We're always responding to things, but we cannot, it takes too much time, and time is not helping Ukraine at this moment. So we simply have to do more, and we have to think of new ways of doing it if the United States will not be that leader that they've been up till now.
So Arseny, when you are making, I'm sure, similar arguments right now in Berlin at your meetings, what do you hear back? Do you hear people, do you feel they share your urgency? Do they believe Ukraine can prevail? Can you share something from Berlin?
Well, frankly speaking, I expected worse.
Okay,
but
that's already good news.
Absolutely. The conference started with very inspiring 2 addresses that have been delivered by our German and Estonian friends. They were straight to the point, clearly understanding the outcomes, the negative, both and positive outcomes of Ukraine's victory or Ukraine's failure. My guess is that, look, there are 2 things that have to be combined. The first one is a political will, okay? And another one is, let me put it this, like an industrial or executive will. So one thing is to deliver a perfect speech. Another thing is to execute, to deliver on that kind of perfect speech. This so-called drip approach, these kind of approaches emboldens Putin, emboldens him to escalate. So whether I was inspired with the US decision to lift the restrictions on ETA camps, frankly, no. And I will tell you the reason why, because it sounds strange for me. The reason why Americans and another allies self-imposed restrictions on the ammo that they have already delivered to Ukraine. Ukraine acts within the international law. Ukraine acts in line with the UN Charter. So why should you guys define the military targets that are legitimate targets under international law? So why you give any kind of pretext to Russians right now to speculate over this and to misuse this topic? So put it in a nutshell, Oresia. We are right now at a quite pivotal moment. So Putin is losing every single day 1,500 his crazy soldiers. So he is in trouble. We are in a complicated situation too, but he is in trouble. Right now, we need a kind of very strong thirst, a very strong push, to show to him that, look, we're going to prevail in this war and we won't back down, sorry.
Yeah, I think your point about having a political will, a strategy, and commanding resources to actually deliver on that political will is key in this war. And this is where I think a lot of dissatisfaction and irritation comes in Kyiv, where words don't match action and dedication of resources. And I'm sure Benjamin can tell us that, coming from the first country, European country, the largest supplier of military assistance to Ukraine, Germany, but all the hurdles and difficulties that it had to go through, the delays, and again, the small quantities of a lot of equipment that is even delivered, that is also true. Benjamin, do let us know, what are discussions now in Berlin with Trump again coming to the White House? Can Ukraine rely on Germany?
Thanks very much, Arisia. Great to be on this panel. I'd like to really second everything that Kajsa Ollongren said in her address, which I think really was to the point about what our situation is, what needs to be done, and indeed what can we do. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a second. But while I was glad to hear that Arseny wasn't disappointed in Berlin, I would say, well, give it time. You've only just been in town for a little while. And there's been a consistent problem with the approach here, that even those who have been more forward-leaning rhetorically, such as the Greens, the Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, and so on, they haven't been able to actually carry it through in the way that was described in terms of executive will, in the terms that I would put actually as real strategy. Because what is the strategy supposed to do? You set a goal, and that's not clear in Berlin. What is the goal? So that's the first problem. Olaf Scholz, after 1,000 days of full-scale war, still has not said that Ukraine should win and Russia should lose. And it is that uncertainty about what the goal is that has driven a policy of muddling through that is based on a strategy of continuity, of preserving as much of the pre-2022 world, as much of multipolarity as possible, rather than actually accelerating Ukraine's victory, which is in Europe's security interest, because it's believed here, unfortunately, in some of the highest echelons, that would accelerate the systemic competition between authoritarian regimes and democracies, and that would require Germany to really change in the way that the Zeitenwende speech promised, but which has singularly been failed to deliver on by the current government. Now, we know that government's on its last legs. It's living, thankfully, on borrowed time. But the question is, will that seriously change in the long run? Because what we don't see is, even again, those more forward-leaning voices, the green steam in the boiler, as it was called in a recent article in Germany, which has been powering the better sides of Germany's approach. Even in the Green Party, there is not a strong commitment to Ukraine and NATO. There is not a strong commitment to actually allocating the kind of resources, taking the kind of steps that would be needed to win. And I'll go through what some of those steps could be that Germany could actually do. And this relates to the letter that we had published today, which Kajsa signed, and along with a host of former defense ministers, foreign ministers, presidents, and so on. There's 5 things that we could very clearly do, actually, as Europeans and Canadians, regardless of what the US does, to secure Ukraine and thus to secure ourselves. The first is to arm Ukraine to win. And that means, yes, continuing to transfer from our stocks, but as was mentioned, to invest in Ukraine's defense industry and to co-produce the kind of advanced emerging military technologies that could tilt the battlefield in Ukraine's favor, to offset Russia's traditional advantages in mass and in numbers of people, but also to destabilize their electronic warfare capabilities. And primarily that means long-range precision strike in mass, but there's also other capabilities that we could and should be doing more to make sure that Ukraine gets. The second thing is seize the Russian assets, seize all $300 billion to create the war chest that we need to fund Ukraine's victory. This is a time when money is notoriously tight in Europe. Germany is one of the few countries where actually technically it isn't, where Germany could borrow a lot of money if they wanted to, but they're actually choosing not to, and don't forget that. But seize these assets. It's legal, it's economically viable, and most of these assets reside in European states. Third, we should extend air defense cover over Western Ukraine, and we should use that shield not only to take the pressure off of Ukraine's air defense assets, but also to provide a shield under which we could actually send ground troops from willing countries around Europe and from Canada to conduct non-combat tasks, as was presented as a proposal by Emmanuel Macron, so demining, training, logistics support, etc. That would show our commitment. It would show also that we have more skin in the game. Fourth, we need to actually commit to Ukraine's NATO membership, and that's another thing that also German politicians have not done across almost the political spectrum. There has not been a uniform commitment to that. Some people have put their necks above the parapet and said we should do it. But on the way, much like Finland and Sweden needed interim security guarantees, there have to be proper mutual defense guarantees provided, again, by credible coalition of the willing around Europe to secure that interim period between the end of hostilities and Ukraine actually getting into NATO. And fifth, we actually have to be able to show that we can stand up for ourselves. That means that countries around Europe who are serious about this, and many are already doing this, look at Poland, look at the Baltic states, etc., spend 3% of GDP on defense, but also spend it wisely. And we'll come back to that in one moment. Spend 3% on defense, but also we need to up the economic ante. Look, we have a great advantage over Russia in terms of our economy, but it's not an advantage unless we use it as one. So we actually have to start really tightening the screws on the Russian economy. That means not only enforcing sanctions, but it means stopping supplying any of the things they need, making sure that we don't allow them the capabilities that they can actually continue to wage war, and find other measures, be they fiscal or otherwise, to turn the heat up on a Russian economy that's actually creaking. And last thing is to say basically to both Russia and China, look, we won't be pushed around. This is in our interest. It's in accordance with our values, and we're going to stand up for ourselves. So I think there's a number of those things that we could do. But fundamentally, Europe needs to actually stand up in this way. We need to spend, we need to show our strength, and we need to embrace our strength, but we also need to get strategic. And in the short term, what that means, as Kaiser Ollongren mentioned, building up our defense industry in a serious way and having a grown-up conversation about that, while at the same time recognizing we're in a race against time, against Russia. Ukraine is buying us time. The more we support Ukraine, the more time it buys us. But also we have to use that time wisely. And what does that mean? It means not running Russia's race, not trying to match Russia rifle for rifle, tank for tank. It means actually an offset strategy that leverages our better technological and research base, our better economic base that could rapidly scale up the kind of military technologies that we need to turn the tables. So there's so much that could be done. Again, I don't see that happening in Berlin at the moment, to be quite honest, because there is a significant strategic deficit here. That is one of the reasons why Olaf Scholz's bad strategy has not been effectively challenged. And the key to that strategy, as I said at the very beginning, set the goal first. What is the goal you want to achieve? Ukrainian victory as part of an integrated strategy for a secure Europe and for the kind of world in which freedom and democracy can thrive. Then you set your guiding policy. And then you take coherent actions backed up by resources to achieve that. Strategy is not rocket science, but we haven't got over the obstacles to creating it. So that's what we need to do to actually, regardless of what Trump does, to secure Europe.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. And I know that Arseny needs to leave. And since he did not sign that letter, from what I understand, I want him to say what he thinks about it, especially as a, can I say former politician? Especially as a former politician who understands how important it is to have political backing, you know, for this kind of long-term commitments, right? I mean, we are facing the kind of crumbling consensus and majorities in European countries to underpin that implementation. So does that sound to you, Arseny, like a good plan? And will you present it in your meetings?
Well, you know, it sounds terrific, frankly speaking. You've done a great job. What I would add to this kind of promising and amazing letter, I believe that we need to indicate that secondary sanctions are needed. Here is the thing. The main source of the Russian economy and the war chest of Russia is financed with carbs, with oil and gas. It's around $300 billion per year. So it's twice as much as Russia already allocated in its military budget for the next year. So we need urgently to ramp up sanctions and to introduce secondary sanctions against everyone who tries to circumvent sanctions, and to apply some kind of soft pressure even on some NATO member states, for example, like Turkey, that provided a lifeline to the Russian Federation. And we need to have a very tough talk, and not just a cheap talk, but tough talk with Chinese and India, who actually are the main source of the Russian income for the carbs. All of the rest is perfect. And last but not least, Benjamin, we need to find statesperson who can endorse and execute the letter that you've already written.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And this will be an interesting, I'm sure there's a campaign around the letter. It's not just to write the letter.
Great.
And maybe Kaisa can also say a little bit about it while we're on the letter. I know you need to leave. Thanks, and have productive meetings in Berlin. We need you there.
Mikhailo, Gustav, Kaisa, Benjamin, and Orisia, thank you. It was really a pleasure. Take care, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
So we'll continue with maybe Kaisa on the letter and how some of these ideas can be made operational. And then I want to bring in Mikhailo, because number one point is arm Ukraine to win, and we are forward looking. So first to Kaisa, what are the next steps around this letter? And then I'll come to Mikhailo.
Yeah, well, if you allow me first a little bit broader and then on the letter.
Yes, go ahead.
I think we have to recognize that some countries have been very distracted. It is not that we found that Ukraine was not important anymore, but there are very other things happening. So in the US, of course, the elections, in various European countries, also political issues, France, snap elections, and the war in Gaza, in the Middle East. So there were a lot of things going on. It's not an excuse, because we have to be able, of course, to face multiple theaters. We cannot leave the one and just hop to the other one. So it's not an excuse, but just saying that some countries have been very preoccupied. So now the American elections, okay, we know the result. We don't have to be anxious about the elections themselves. We have to deal with the result of the elections. In Europe, and that is also something that is marked in the letter, we should not for the moment look perhaps at those countries who cannot lead. We should look at the countries who take the lead. Poland is a very important and very interesting country, because Poland has, under the previous government, but also under the current government, is it spending more than 4% on its defense. Poland is really showing the way here. And I think that is very important. And you see now also that France, but also Germany and others, they are engaging more with Poland. The new High Rep, Kaja Kallas, is engaging with Poland. The Nordic countries are very much looking always towards Poland. So there are also others who can take the lead and who can show the way, while perhaps Germany first has to await the results of their elections. But we cannot wait for it. That is my point, and I think that is also the point of the letter. We know that there is a number of countries that have been forward-leaning all this time, that can take the lead, that can fill a certain gap there is, and only there has to be the political willingness to use it, and to use the Joint Expeditionary Force, or to use this leadership by Poland, and to actually fill it with concrete steps. And those concrete steps has, of course, to be the budget, the ammunition, the weapons, and the plans. And we have to take some things serious. I think, why are we accepting that the whole country, the whole of Ukraine, is attacked every night with missiles and drones? Why are we accepting this? The civilian infrastructure people are killed. The energy infrastructure is really, not completely, but almost completely taken out at some points. It is extremely costly to build it back every time. It would be much better if we found a way to protect that part of Ukraine that is not actually, the invaded part of Ukraine. And there has to be some serious thinking done on how to solve this issue. So not only because our own airspaces have been invaded, like in the Baltic countries and several other countries, but also because it is not normal that Ukraine can be attacked in this way constantly. So I think there are really new possibilities, new ways that have to be explored, because this war of attrition, this is going to be not only very costly, but we cannot see how it's going to come to an end, because I agree Russia is not winning. Russia is not doing well. But one thing is for sure, they have no respect for human lives, which means that they can continue to push forward more and more soldiers, that they have changed their economy into a war economy. That's going to cost normal Russian people. I mean, it's not free, of course, this. But it's a resilient society, because it's a dictatorship. So society is not going to revolt against it. So time is on Russia's side, and we have to think about new ways. And that is why I support the suggestions that Benjamin just very eloquently stated to the audience.
Thank you, Kaisa. So now I want to bring in Mikhailo, because of course, point number one is to arm Ukraine to win. And I think something that also connects to what you said about this European pillar of NATO and kind of modernizing European security and defense to be fit for wars to come. And this war to come is kind of being shaped right now on Ukrainian soil, you know? And this is where I would like Mikhailo to come in and to perhaps explain what are we seeing as this war evolves, and what, you know, of course, we used to hearing about these capabilities that Ukraine needs, but are there maybe some interesting international projects bilaterally where we are making breakthroughs on this battlefield, and what are some of these new capabilities that are being now deployed? If you can.
Yeah, thank you very
Thanks.
much. And first of all, I'd like to add a little bit of motivation for Europeans to do not see on Ukraine-Russia war as something like different aspects, and war on like a Middle East, it's something different. Yeah, we're living in the geopolitical matrix when we are facing the axis of evil already. No, it's not the Russians. It's not only Russians now. It's the North Koreans already on the direct contact with Ukrainian engagements with Ukrainian forces. And of course, if we're talking about economical capabilities of Russia, of course, we have China, North Korea, Iran, creating kind of defense industry plan, working like in computer game. What they need, they produce. And if for example, North Korea producing now half of all of ammunition Russia using against Ukraine, half of ammunition, 3 million shells per year. This is a question of motivation. Europeans should understand. Even Trump now press on Europe that Europe should issue responsibility. I think that this is our Europeans' motivation. It's our obligation to pay more attention to our security and defense. To be why we need to be dependent on United States. We should be independent on United States. Which should be is it possible to say it should be two divisions in NATO, American division and European division, separately 50-50, dividing the responsibility on it. If we have this understanding, everything will be okay. I mean, we will find a way how to defend ourselves. And talking about the concrete projects which Ukraine and Europe invest actually could conduct and develop. Actually, we have a champion here, Denmark, which actually invested small money to Ukrainian plant, and it was surprisingly absolutely perfect result, producing the 16 artillery system Bogdana, which is pretty nice and very similar to Caesar French artillery system. After this, Denmark, in 2 months, we produced for Danish money, we produced a 16 artillery system. After this, Denmark already started to invest 600 million of euro to Ukrainian defense industry in concrete projects, armor vehicles, anti-tank missiles, whatever. As I know, Sweden already participate in these projects. The same, they're funding concrete plants in Ukraine to produce Ukrainian weapon for Ukrainian armed forces. But of course, it's very useful for European armed forces or defense industry, because they get in a practical experience how to use it on the battlefield, and of course the practical experience how to produce this weapon adapted already to battlefield. The same, I think that the Norway on the same path. So I think that Europeans could find a way how to invest the best projects in Ukraine. Of course, maybe it could be joint products in joint investments and joint technology, especially drones, but not only drones. We need artillery, we need ammunition, we need anti-tank, we need mortars, we need very traditional stuff to continue this war. And this war won't finish with Trump propositions. Believe me, it will be a war between axis of evil and us. I mean, Europeans. Especially because if United States will pay attention on Indo-Pacific, okay, it's not a bad choice, I think, but we need to understand that this is our responsibility for this security, not only Ukrainians. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikhailo. And I see Benjamin's hand. Is it related to what Mikhailo said? And then I want to bring in Gustav.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Thanks, Arisia.
Go
It's
ahead.
related to what both Kaisa and Mikhailo said, because I fully agree with the list that Mikhailo just laid out. Absolutely, this requires core basics at scale, as well as the emerging technologies that can leverage our advantage and punish the Russians for their weaknesses and allow them not to be able to fight as they want to fight, which is crucial to not only winning the war, but winning it in a way at a lower human cost for Ukraine, which is essential. And that's something we in NATO have to be learning too. But it was interesting. We've heard consistently the mention of the need for political will. And this is a consistent refrain. We have some great leaders in Europe, as has been mentioned. We've had excellent leadership from Kaja Kallas, from Gabrielis Landsbergis, from others. We have a surfeit of vision in Europe, actually, among those people. Poland was mentioned as a leader of European defense, totally correct. But often when we talk about political will, we don't really consider where it comes from or how you generate it if you don't have it. And this is where, for me, strategy comes in. This is what strategy is. Strategy is the immaterial infrastructure of courage and will. It transforms overwhelming issues, insolvable challenges, and makes them into solvable problems. And that's why we actually have to be thinking more in a deep level about strategies to win. But you have to understand that there's the goal there first. Taking it step by step, securing Ukraine to secure Europe, building the European pillar of NATO to keep the US in, but to ensure against a reallocation of capabilities to the Indo-Pacific. Those are proximate objectives along the way for which you can set strategies to achieve. And then what this has the effect of, to paraphrase William James, the psychologist, he said, you don't do brave things because you have brave feelings. You get brave feelings when you do brave things. And in order to do those brave things, we need a plan. And that's where the strategy comes in. So that's why we've set up this 5-point plan, but also why we set up the Democratic Strategy Initiative to do this for Europe, to build those strategies that we need to win.
Yeah, very good point, Benjamin. And I also, it's a stage of war where the kind of crisis management and just bravery is almost not enough. And I'm sure Gustav, who I will bring in now, who is spent 10 years with the European Council on Foreign Affairs in Berlin, and now he's back in Vienna at the Military Academy of the Austrian Ministry of Defense. He has been to Ukraine multiple times, met soldiers right there on the front line. Somebody told me that, heroes are those who are dead. It's the people who are doing the daily little bit routine that are carrying the war, and almost I've heard the appeal for understanding this resilience, the cross-cutting resilience from infantry to paramedics to economic resilience. Their families are, insecure, and their children can go to school. All of this underpins resistance of Ukraine and this kind of daily battle. So, Gustav, you've listened to a lot of what we said today.
What we miss? Well, if I can add two things. So the first thing is Ukrainians,
I think, Gustav, I don't see your video. Something happened with your video. Yes, now it's back.
Okay, sorry. I had to stay in the video because my camera, if I switch it off, it never switches on again.
Okay.
So first off, to understand Ukrainians' motivation, the prime motivation is we have to fight because we don't want our children to go through the same fight all over again. It's a country that has sustained war and aggression for over 10 years. They know what the enemy is and what the enemy's plans are. There is no delusion on that side. So the thing is, of course, yes, the war has hardships and problems, and you try to overcome them as good as they can. Human resources for Ukraine is actually the most precious resource right now. And this is actually not properly understood in the West. You can replace a tank, you can repair it, you can build a new one. But especially in the military, to create officers who are experienced and have experience in leading troops, this takes time. And unfortunately, all the material shortages from the shell shortages this spring have created losses in personnel in the Ukrainian armed forces, which are irreplaceable. And this is sort of what makes me furious when I hear all these delays and stories. And of course, you can trace the problems back to peacetime industry, etc. But the problem is we need to understand that at the other end of the line, it costs lives that we can't replace. And the qualitative superiority of Ukrainian forces fighting in early 2022 rested on the increased experience, on an army that had been very much professionalized, that had experience in the Donbass, that knew the enemy very well. And of course, this qualitative edge is eroded if you let them through periods or where shortages in material lead to high times of losses, which is my big fear with the Trump administration. Not that I think that one should sort of take every Tuesday Gabbard word at face value, and this is the policy that will be implemented. But probably we see again a time when the Americans are fighting with themselves now within the Republican Party instead of Democrats versus Republicans, what they're going to do. And is the European answer to just watch that, or can we try to substitute it? Of course, the problem is, as we haven't ramped up our defense industry, our actual ability to step in is, of course, diminished because we have been neglected to the problem for almost 3 years. But, you know, better late than never. And the other thing is, and that is sort of continuing where Benjamin left off, strategy. I'm completely flabbergasted by the discourse in Berlin about the fear of escalation. At the same time, the sort of relaxed attitude towards what if Russia wins this. So at the one time, you see Russia as the kind of almighty superpower that, in parallel of fighting a war in Ukraine that already sucks in 600,000 armed personnel, that Russia seems to be able to escalate against NATO, with the US still being in Europe here and united. So they seem to be super powerful, but they seem not to be super powerful enough that scares Europeans, that if they win the war and can actually recapitalize their army and can replenish them and rebuild some of their stocks, then there won't be a threat to Europe. There is a huge inconsistency in that thinking, in overemphasizing Russia's short-term escalation potential and underestimating Russia's long-term danger to Europe. And I haven't found a recipe how to explain that to Germans. I tried for 10 years. They still seem to be ignorant to the fact.
Thank you, Gustav. And I think you, in a way, answered the question from James Nixie, who is the director of Russian Eurasia program, and who actually, I must say, thank, because he inspired us to do this event. He said, it's 1,000 days. What are we guys doing? So thank you, James, for mobilizing us for this. And James is asking, what do the major Western players not understand about this war or about Russia, which they should? So you, Gustav, in a way, gave your answer, but I want to bring it to Kaisa and Benjamin and Mikhailo, because I think it's a fundamental question. The assumptions we are making about what comes next and what are the Russians' true motives, the nature of the regime. So, Kaisa, what would be your answer to that? What we are not understanding about Russia or this war?
Yeah, well, there are definitely people who are understanding Russia, but of course, in our response, in our strategic response, we have to better understand. So, if you look back, it is Putin and his idea, distorted idea, of course, of what the Russian Empire should look like. It is, I think, a distorted idea about the threat that he thinks NATO poses to him. And I think so it is not only about the land of Ukraine, it is about the choice of Ukraine for Europe, the choice for European values, the choice for NATO as their, by free will, the open door of NATO to be part of that security arrangement. That is what has enraged Putin. And this is something that has been going on for a long time. And we all know it now, going back to Munich in 2007, Georgia in 2008, Crimea in 2014, and then the actual build-up in 2021 and, of course, 22, finally resulting in the large-scale invasion while the war itself was already going on. I mean, there is not so much logic to this. I think one of the reasons at the time why we were reluctant to really believe that it was going to happen, of course, not discarding the evidence that the Americans and the UK put forward, because that was all there. And I think we all were also preparing for the possibility. But somewhere in many heads in Europe, there was this deep hesitation, because we thought it is not rational, it is not logical to take this step. So what we don't understand is that it isn't rational and it isn't logical, but it is a deep conviction, and it comes with, it doesn't matter what it costs. It doesn't matter what it costs in lives. It doesn't matter what it costs in terms of money. Look at how much of the state budget goes into defense, how the whole economy is turned into a war economy, that ordinary Russians are only suffering the results of this war, but of course not well informed about what actually is going on. So there is this very deep determination. And like I said in the beginning, I think that only when Putin himself and the clique around him is convinced that it cannot be won, because our support is so strong that it's going to be impossible for them to win, they will start looking for ways to get out of this. And until then, it will only continue. And that is what we have to understand, because that is what Ukraine, but also we are up against.
And would you say that we are not at this moment yet where they are looking for the way out?
It is difficult to say because I think we are now showing more strength and resolve, but of course there's also disunity. I think the voice from Germany was very clear, Benjamin, very disappointed in the phone call by Bundeskanzler Scholz to Putin, because it only shows that we are not always united. We really have to remain united on these issues. And once you open up, this divergence, then you give Putin exactly what he wants. I mean, it's difficult enough with Trump and his promises. So let's, at least on the European side, try to stay united. So there are both pluses, but also minuses, unfortunately. And I think I can agree also with Benjamin. It's more or less philosophical. Where does this political will come from? It is not only indeed from presidents or outcomes of elections. It's also about how successfully we can communicate the stakes in this war, and the stakes for Europe, the stakes for our citizens. And every politician should put the safety of its people on the forefront, Ukrainian and other Europeans. And then there is only one logical conclusion, which is to do more and not to wait for the ones who are lagging behind, but to go forward with those who are willing and who can.
And this perfectly connects to the question from Craig Oliphant about what can practically be done. Like you, Kaisa, thought on that moment of invasion, what can we do now as this happens? And Craig asked about this joint expeditionary force. He says, can it be more effectively harnessed to support Ukraine at this critical time? So the Netherlands is part of it. Would you be able to say, are there any discussions about possible deployment or anything on the Jeff? And then maybe Gustav and Mikhailo, if on your end.
Yeah, just very briefly from my side, the Jeff, when I was in it as a minister with Ben Wallace from the UK side, we always said to each other, this is the group of countries that do things. We want to do things immediately, as soon as possible. It's very concrete. That's the strength, I think, of Jeff. 10 northern European countries led by the UK, very practical, can immediately jump into action. So they could play a role, but Poland is not in it, Germany is not in it. So we could use it, but expand it with a few other countries. And it's always it's connected to NATO. Now that Sweden and Finland are in NATO, it is completely a group of NATO countries with concrete capabilities that can be put to use. So yes, my answer would be yes.
Okay, excellent. Benjamin, I see your hand. And then maybe Mikhailo.
Yes, thanks very much. We actually proposed this in the summer of 2023, that the Jeff plus Poland would be a way to bring in Ukraine as well, to actually have that coalition of the willing who could extend meaningful mutual defense guarantees to Ukraine in the interim period as a way in rather than an alternative to NATO. So I would fully support that idea. Indeed, we know Ben Wallace and others are very much in favor of that idea. So we have to try and push it through, I think, because that's one of the realistic institutional bases from which we have to use as a platform to get from where we are to where we need to be. Very quickly, because I think James Nixie's question is really important on this about what's not understood. I agree with Gustav. The stakes of this are not understood in Berlin. This is still talked about as a crisis. It is understood by the German public as a crisis that can be managed and which would go away once it has been successfully managed. There is very little understanding that this is the new normal and that we are in a truly systemic competition with Russia. We're also with China, but especially with Russia on our doorstep. It's often said NATO expansion was a threat to Russia. It wasn't. The threat is our existence as successful, thriving democracies. That is what Putin wants to subjugate, because that shines the light on their abject failure to provide any kind of decent conditions, any kind of decent life in Russia. Russia is not going to win a soft power competition with anyone. Why are we letting it undermine our morale? We need to stand up for this, because otherwise the next step is trying to undermine Article 5, trying to subjugate our democracies, trying to undermine the European Union, trying to stop us from doing the things that make our countries the envy of the world. So this is what has to be understood, that those are the stakes involved. The last thing that's not understood in Berlin is that others are moving ahead without them. And this is as Kaisa said, look, I mean, there's the good kind of unity and there's the bad kind of unity. Unity around the position of Tallinn, great. Unity around the position of Berlin, not what we need right now at all. And this is the problem. If it's lowest common denominator, it is not fit for the challenge that we face. We need highest common factor. We need that coalition of the willing to pull ahead, and we can't let those who would obstruct this get in the way. So Germany's going to have to wake up and catch up.
Thanks, Benjamin. And I think it's we are trying, and I mean expert and academic community, trying to make different arguments, including the most recent one from Kiel, that actually calculated the cost to Germany of withdrawing assistance to Ukraine that would be 10 to 20 times bigger compared to what Germany provides right now, which is 0.1% of its GDP. But you know, it's the reasoning so far is not really pushing the line. We'll see what comes out of the elections, right? But that in Germany there will be elections on the 23rd of February, and what kind of coalition will emerge. But Mikhailo, is Jeff discussed in Ukraine? Is this something that would be significant for Kyiv? I didn't hear much Ukrainians perhaps openly calling for Jeff.
Yeah, we're discussing it, and actually we're discussing it more strategically. I mean that the political and geopolitical understanding of Europe, it the European role in the modern world and modern situation. As I told it, we should look at the wide metrics, not like just crisis between Ukraine and Russia. Now will be a ceasefire, and it will be the same like 10 years ago or at least 5 years ago. No, it will be really the long time of war, not only between Ukraine and Russia. It will be global situation. And of course, we are talking about the European self-understanding of how Europe should build the own armed forces. Of course, we are not talking now the Charles de Gaulle ideas, but at least in defense industry, it looks like we have some progress inside of European Union and the new role of European Defense Agency. And I said you that Ukraine started to participate a lot of with European projects in defense industry. But talking about the armed forces, the joint forces of Europe, I'm not talking European Union, UK, or Europe, together with Ukraine. Of course, we need to discuss it. And the main warfare strategy, the goal of this, because joint expeditionary forces is just instrument which could be used on tactical or operational level again to be self-independent in military means. We should have strategic intelligence. We need to have all of command and control, tactical awareness, operational awareness, independent, self-independent for Europe to have capabilities to complete the concrete military goals and complete concrete military tasks. This is different just for some operation from Jeff or something like you to use some units. We need to understand why we need these joint forces, joint armed forces, whatever, how we call it in Europe. But I'm sure that we have no choice but discuss it and create it. Early or later, it depends on us, but we need to create it if we live in this very, very tough geopolitical future.
Thank you. I see Kaisa sent and Gustav. Kaisa, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just very briefly coming back to how things are connected, and it was mentioned already that the fact that North Korean military are fighting alongside the Russians, that is, and I think rightly marked also by President Zelensky, and also by the US administration, that is a real escalation. And not because of the numbers. Let's say that it's about 10,000 now, but it could grow. But imagine that now North Korean soldiers are gaining combat experience in modern warfare. Of course, Korea, the Republic of Korea, is very worried about this. So it brings directly the war in Ukraine and the Russian aggression into the Indo-Pacific theater. And it was already mentioned, rightly so, that there are all kinds of connections between all kinds of, let's call it theaters around the world, be it in the Sahel or the Middle East, where you see this. And this is something that we must bring into the discussion with the United States. Because, of course, being a Republican isolationist, you can easily say, we don't want war and we don't want to have our American soldiers anywhere anymore. But it's not going to work. So at some point, reality there will kick in. And if they really worry about China and Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific freedom of navigation, then they don't want to go at it alone. And then we European countries also have to be ready to step up there. So that just underlining the fact that yes, it is interconnected, and also escalation comes from Russia. Bringing North Korean soldiers in is absolutely an escalation. I saw one of the questions was what about this nuclear doctrine? Nuclear weapons are serious, so we always have to take every development around nuclear weapons seriously. But I think it is part of the rhetoric coming from the Kremlin, trying to scare us, to play in to the fear that we have in our societies, which is normal. Of course, people are afraid, but that's what it is. So it is not, let's say, a reason for us to step down. In the situation where we find ourselves, we have to step up.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you also answered the question from Peter Snow, who was asking, how do you persuade Trump not to settle just for the ceasefire, but to back Ukraine? That kind of interlinkages that you've described surely should be persuasive. But also, I think we do know that this war in a non-Western world is seen as the war between United States and Russia, no matter what we believe and no matter the truth. And what is even more disturbing is that majorities, that's according to actually ECFR poll, believe that Russia is going to win. And this will have a direct impact on American power projection in other regions, not just, actually mainly in other regions, not in Europe. So that could be a contribution from my side, how to try to persuade Trump. But I've seen Gustav's hand, and then we'll be wrapping up. Gustav.
Yes, I just want to give two fingers to sort of us teaching Ukrainians how to fight. I think on a tactical level, we should be extremely humble. I've spoken to Ukrainian soldiers who have been prisoner of war and returned them to the fight, and they said, the war I've been taken prisoner in was different than the war I rejoined a year later. This war evolves extremely rapid. Technology in the war evolves extremely rapid. And we saw in the counteroffensive 2023, teaching Ukrainian company and platoon commanders how we do this in NATO and then sending them off is not probably the best recipe. But so all sort of chaff and multinational troop formations, that's all nice and fine, but I think it's not what Ukraine needs. Where Ukraine has a deficit and where there are a lot of complaints and they're becoming louder as the situation in Donbass worsens is the issue of operative planning. Ukrainians are very good tactically because they have done a lot of fighting in the Donbass and they have experience on that and they know how to fight battalion-wise. But the Ukrainian army was never meant to be so large as it is now. And they don't have the capability and the capacity in terms of staff officers, planning capabilities, etc., to jointly operate such a huge mass of armed forces. It was never intended to be. Now it is the way it is. But on that, they can actually need our help. Also to structuralize process. Ukrainians are super good at improvisation, but to introduce structured processes, that's something they're struggling with. And in this, international cooperation helps. But that would more call for high-level contacts for, like, for example, sending an advisory mission like we did in police and civilian security sector reform with a three-star general. And on this, it's militaries are hierarchical. It's a different thing if you send a colonel who's a good expert or you send a three-star general with the colonel who is the expert to talk to military rank and file and keep processes upright. And here we've been much too cautious on that. Actually, we could do that within the sort of military diplomacy attaché corps to really ramp up their function, their capability by sending more seconded military attachés, by increasing their rank, etc. We can trick around a lot if we really want to. And that is something that is necessary. Fighting on battalion level, Ukrainians, they know how to do that, really.
Thank you, Gustav, for reminding us that. Benjamin?
I'll be super quick. Just to say, there's a couple of questions in the chat. One from Robert Pchel, who's talking about wish lists are nice and so on. The question we've all been asking for the last year is how to get from should to did, because that's what we've mainly agreed on what needs to be done. And part of the game we're playing now is to foster the political conditions for implementation, to put the political wind behind the sails of those who actually want to drive ahead. So this is part of the discursive fight, and it's important that you understand that as well as part of the fight. For Anna Reid's question, and if that's the Anna Reid who wrote Borderland, I loved your book when I first went to Ukraine 20 years ago. So thank you very much indeed.
That's the same, Anna.
That's wonderful. So Hannah, thank you very much for that. But I disagree with your skepticism on Jeff, because I don't see a good alternative. And much as I don't see any alternative to NATO membership for Ukraine in the long run, no one has actually given me any kind of credible explanation about what a viable alternative would be. If you have one, then do let us know. We'll consider it. But until one emerges, then this, I think, should be the plan.
Thank you, Benjamin. And what an excellent panel. I think it kind of really set us through in the reality of where we are at this war, but also helped us look forward that there are ideas, there are ways, and it's a question of creating the coalition of the willing, the brave, you name it, who actually have the same security risk perception about what is at stake. And then the rest will follow or not. But I think it is clear that when Putin announced his war almost 1,000 days ago with this memorandum to Americans, he asked US troops to be out. You know, he asked the NATO borders to be moved to 1997. Let's not forget that. And I think we've reminded, as long as we are just looking at this as a regional war, as you know, monitoring the village by village on the front line, which is important for the lives of the people and for Ukraine, we are missing a much bigger picture. What is this fight about? And I sometimes think if we need a ceasefire, if it's in our interest, this should happen. But if it's imposed by Putin on his terms, that he needs time to rearm and hit all of us harder, then I think that is actually, we should be aware as audiences, as experts, politicians, and should be honest with their stakeholders and constituencies, because I think we may end up in the situation we are so hard trying to avoid, facing Russian army in combat, and that is not what we want. And that is why I think at this 1,000 day we should humbly thank Ukrainian armed forces, Ukrainian nurses, Ukrainian teachers, Ukrainian engineers who are building the trenches, Ukrainian chaplains who are working with the soldiers in the trenches, analysts like Mikhailo, who is daily trying to keep up, you know, awareness about this war to people, and all of you, especially Western backers, who actually secured the fact that Ukraine still resists, because without that assistance, Ukraine would be in a much, much worse position. So I would like on this day for all of you to understand the critical moment we are at, to remember some of these practical suggestions and take them forward whichever way your professional careers allow that to do, because a lot is at stake. I would like just to remind that we are convening quite a large conference on Russia on the 10th of December in Chatham House. It's already announced online. We're also doing a smaller event on Ukraine's recovery at wartime and resilience in Rome with the Institute of International Affairs on the 25th of November. And we are working here relentlessly in various programs in Chatham House, so do follow us. Come to Chatham House, join us on social media, and join me in thanking the speakers for spending this hour and a half dedicating their busy schedules. It was great. Thank you so much. We will release a video shared with you. And meanwhile, stay safe, work for Ukraine, stand with Ukraine, and Slava Ukraini. Thank you so much.
Героям слава. Thank you.
Героям слава.